Today, you guys, I will be doing a video about Nathan Irvin Huggins, who was an African American historian. And not only he was a historian, but he was also very prominent and active in the community as well. He was a college professor, actually. So, with that being said, I am going to present information, and hopefully you guys can share the channel, hit the notification bell, and all that great stuff. All right. So let's get to who is Mr. Nathan Irvin Huggins. So this is Mr. Nathan Huggins right here. That's his picture. All right, here's the biography. So according to the biography here, Nathan Huggins was born on January 14th, 1927. He died December 5th, 1989. And he was a distinguished African American historian, author, and educator. As a leading scholar in the field of African American studies, he was W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of History and of Afro-American Studies at Harvard University, as well as director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African American Research. Okay. So he was born in Chicago, Illinois. His father was Winston J. Huggins, an African-American waiter and railroad worker, and his mother was Marie Warsaw, a Jewish woman. When Huggins was 12 years old, his father left the family and his mother moved them to San Francisco, California. Marie Warsaw died 2 years later, leaving 14-year-old Nathan and his sister on their own. Huggins attended high school and worked as a warehouseman, longshoreman, and porter. Near the end of World War II, he was drafted and completed high school in the Army. Huggins later used the GI Bill of Rights to enter the University of California, Berkeley. Right, so that's where he studied at, and he received his AB degree in 1954 and MA in 1955. He studied at Harvard University, where he received his AM in 1957 and PhD in history in 1962. Okay, so he became Dr. Huggins. All right, so his academic life. So he was an assistant. He held assistant professorship at California State University, Long Beach, Lake Forest College in Illinois, and University of Massachusetts, Boston. He served as visiting associate professor at the University of California at Berkeley before joining the faculty at Columbia University as professor of the history in 1970. 10 years later, Huggins accepted a position as the first W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of History and Afro-American Studies and director of the Du Bois Institute for Afro-American Research at Harvard University. He also taught outside the U.S. at the University of Heidelberg, the John F. Kennedy Institute for North American Studies of the Free University of Berlin, and the University of Grenoble and the Sorbonne. He studied the history of African Americans as an integral part of the history of the United States. His research interests include the history of slavery, the experience of slavery, and its impact on American society and culture. The center of his argument was that without a knowledge of the African American experience, one could not understand what is actually called American history, but rather what colleagues said could be a code for white American history. With careful scholarship and empathy, his Black Odyssey tells the story of the self-creation of the African American people. It traces the full impact of the Middle Passage and of North American slavery, both on the enslaved and on those who enslaved them. Likewise, his study of the Harlem Renaissance is a lens to examine American society in the Jazz Age. Huggins wrote an important biography of Frederick Douglass and edited the biographical series Black Americans of Achievement. He was working on a major biography of the late Nobel Prize winning diplomat Ralph Bunche, and on a shorter book about the civil rights movement in the United States when he died. In 1981, Huggins established the W.E.B. Du Bois lectureship in Afro-American life, history, and culture. Harvard students praised Huggins for exceptional clarity and entertaining lectures in a course he and a colleague taught on changing concept of race in the United States. All right, so he died in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the age of 62. So these are his works at the very bottom, all right, which I'm also going to show. Protesting Against Poverty, Harlem Renaissance, which was published by the Oxford University Press, Key Issues in the Afro-American Experience, which was edited by him, Voices from the Harlem Renaissance, Black Odyssey, the African-American Ordeal in Slavery, Slave and Citizen, The Life of Frederick Douglass, Afro-American Study, a report to the Ford Foundation, W.E.B. Du Bois writing The Suppression of the African Slave Trade, The Soul of Black Folk, Dusk of Dawn Essays, article from The Crisis, Revelation, American History, American Myths. All right. So, and here's the reference at the bottom. All right, so here's an article here. Oxford Journal, Oxford University Press. And he wrote about Martin Luther King Jr., Charisma and Leadership, Nathan Irvin Huggins, okay, the Journal of American History, September 1987, volume 74, number 2. Okay. Martin Luther King Jr., Charisma and Leadership. So it starts off saying that the historical importance of Martin Luther King Jr. goes beyond his work in the civil rights movement, as important as to that was. To begin with, King represented a kind of Black leadership generally unknown at earlier periods in United States history. In the past, Black leaders, for the most part, whether they were reform-minded or accommodationist, had very little tie to a power base. By and large, Black leaders could be categorized as spokesmen and brokers between white power and Blacks. King, however, resisted his leadership on a religious establishment that extended beyond his particular church on a constitution or constituency, both white and Black, that followed him for reasons of ideology and strategy. He also differed from conventional Black leaders by seeming independence from party missionary from institutional constraints. He was free to address himself to issues broader than race and racial justice. Despite objection from conventional leaders in the movement, King spoke out on poverty and economic injustice. He was most daring and independent in his outspoken criticism of the war in Vietnam, despite angry opposition from the president and the leadership of the Democratic Party. Many liberal leaders, especially Blacks in conventional organizations, did not hide their displeasure and their fear that King might help accelerate a shift of national interest from civil rights to peace. Furthermore, the traditional arena for Black protest was racial justice and domestic issues akin to race relations. King, however, took his leadership off conventional turf. All right, so here's the article. It was written in 1987 in the Journal of American History. All right, here it is. These are the list of books that he wrote: Slave and Citizen, The Life of Frederick Douglass, The Black Odyssey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Revelation, Afro-American Studies, Paul Robeson, Jeff Beckworth, James Beckworth, John Rosenbaum, Nat Turner, Harlem Renaissance, Colin Powell, and then the key issue in the Afro-American experience. The list goes on and on. So these are the books that he wrote. And if you want to check out more, you can look it up on archive.org. All right. All right, so that'll be all for today. And that's it. Have a good one. Until next time.